Flames engulfed the luxury sedan as Owen Stone sprinted across the rain-soaked highway, his work boots splashing through puddles of gasoline and glass. The unconscious woman trapped inside wore a designer dress now torn and bloodied, but it was the glittering diamond necklace around her neck that would change everything. As Owen dragged her from the wreckage, just seconds before the car exploded, he had no idea he was holding Natalia Hayes, the billionaire CEO, who had vanished without a trace 6 months ago, presumed dead by the entire world. But when she woke up in the hospital with no memory of who she was, calling herself Sarah and speaking like someone who had never seen wealth in her life, Owen faced an impossible choice. Should he tell this fragile, frightened woman that she was one of the most powerful people in the country? Or protect her from a truth that someone had clearly tried to erase forever? Because one thing was certain: whoever wanted Natalia Hayes dead the first time wasn't finished yet. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The screech of twisted metal against asphalt echoed through the Willowbrook Industrial District as Owen Stone slammed on his brakes, his beat-up pickup truck sliding to a stop just yards from the overturned luxury sedan. Steam hissed from the crumpled hood while orange flames licked hungrily at the rear of the vehicle, growing larger by the second. Owen didn't hesitate. At 34, his carpenter's instincts kicked in. Immediately assess the situation, identify the problems, fix what could be fixed. But this wasn't a broken cabinet or faulty wiring. This was life and death. Call 911. He shouted to the handful of other drivers who had stopped, though most remained frozen behind their steering wheels, mesmerized by the growing fire. Owen was already running, his steel-toed boots crunching over scattered glass and metal debris that painted the wet highway like deadly confetti. The driver's side was completely crushed against the concrete barrier, but through the spider-webbed passenger window, Owen could see her, a woman in what appeared to be an expensive navy dress, unconscious and bleeding from a gash on her forehead. Her dark hair had fallen across her face, but even through the smoke and chaos, something about her seemed oddly familiar, though Owen couldn't place why. The flames were spreading faster now, creeping toward the front of the car with terrifying hunger. Owen grabbed the chunk of concrete from the roadside and smashed it against the passenger window until the safety glass finally gave way, crumbling into thousands of harmless pieces. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" he called as he reached through the window frame, carefully avoiding the jagged edges. No response. The acrid smell of burning plastic and leaking gasoline filled his nostrils, making his eyes water and his throat burn. He had maybe 30 seconds before this became UNSURVIVABL. Owen worked his hands under her arms, supporting her head and neck as best he could while pulling her through the window opening. She was dead weight, completely unconscious, and for a terrifying moment he wondered if he was already too late. But then he felt the shallow rise and fall of her chest against his arm. She was breathing as he lifted her clear of the wreckage. Something caught the emergency lights of the approaching fire truck, a flash of brilliant diamonds around her neck. Even in the chaos, even through the smoke and fear, the necklace was impossible to ignore. It was clearly worth more than Owen made in several years, an intricate web of perfectly cut stones arranged in a pattern that seemed almost familiar, like something he'd seen before but couldn't quite remember. He carried her to safety just as the car's gas tank ignited with a thunderous boom that shook the ground beneath their feet. The explosion sent a pillar of black smoke into the gray Willowbrook sky, and Owen instinctively shielded the woman's body with his own as debris rained down around them. Sir, step back." The paramedics were there now, professional and efficient. As they took over, Owen found himself standing alone on the shoulder of Highway 47, his work clothes singed and dirty, watching as they loaded the unconscious woman onto a stretcher. The diamond necklace glittered under the harsh fluorescent lights of the ambulance. And again Owen felt that strange tug of recognition. "You did good, buddy," said Fire Captain Rodriguez, clapping Owen on the shoulder. "Another minute and she would have been gone. You probably saved her life." Owen nodded absently, still staring at the ambulance as it pulled away, sirens wailing. Something about this felt bigger than a random highway accident, though he couldn't explain why. Maybe it was the expensive car, or the way the woman was dressed like she was heading to some important business meeting. Maybe it was that necklace, so distinctive and valuable that it seemed out of place on a lonely stretch of industrial highway. His phone buzzed a text from Mrs. Patterson, his neighbor who watched 8-year-old Emma after school. "Everything okay?" Heard sirens. Owen quickly typed back that he'd be home soon, then took one last look at the smoking wreckage being hauled away by the tow truck. As he drove home through the working-class neighborhoods of Willowbrook Heights, Owen couldn't shake the image of that woman's face or the way the diamonds had caught the light. He'd grown up in this town, knew most of the families, and she definitely wasn't local. So what had brought someone who could afford a car like that and jewelry like that to this forgotten corner of the industrial district? 20 minutes later, Owen pulled into the narrow driveway of his small 2-bedroom house on Maple Street, the same house where he'd grown up before his parents died in a factory accident when he was 19. Emma burst through the front door. Before he'd even turned off the engine, her backpack bouncing as she ran toward him with the boundless energy that only 8-year-olds possessed. "Daddy, Mrs. Patterson said there was an accident. Are you okay? Did someone get hurt?" Her questions tumbled out in a breathless rush as she wrapped her arms around his waist, and Owen felt the familiar warmth that made all his struggles worthwhile. "I'm fine, sweetheart," he said, ruffling her auburn curls, so much like her mother's had been. "Just helped someone who needed it. That's what we do, right?" Emma nodded solemnly. "Mama always said helping people is the most important job in the world." Owen's chest tightened. Sarah had been gone for 3 years now, taken by cancer when Emma was just 5, but her wisdom lived on in their daughter's pure heart. Sarah had been the one with dreams bigger than Willowbrook. She'd wanted to travel, to see the world beyond the factory towns and industrial districts. Owen had promised her they'd make it happen someday, but someday had run out too quickly. Now, it was just him and Emma in their little house, making ends meet with his carpentry business and the occasional construction job. Owen built custom cabinets and furniture for the wealthier neighborhoods across town. Quality work that he took pride in, but it barely covered the mortgage and Emma's expenses. Still, they had each other, and that was enough. As they walked inside together, Emma chattering about her day at Willowbrook Elementary, Owen found his thoughts drifting back to the accident. Something about that woman nagged at him, and not just because of the expensive necklace. There had been something familiar about her features, even through the blood and smoke. Like he'd seen her somewhere before, maybe on television or in a magazine. But that was ridiculous. Owen's world was small and predictable: work, Emma, their little house, and the tight-knit community of neighbors who looked out for each other. Whatever world that woman came from, with her designer dress and diamond necklace, it was as far from Willowbrook Heights as the moon. Still, as he helped Emma with her homework at their kitchen table, Owen couldn't stop thinking about those diamonds catching the emergency lights, and the strange feeling that this random act of heroism was about to change everything. The alarm clock's harsh beeping cut through the pre-dawn darkness at 5:30 a.m., just like it had every weekday for the past 3 years. Owen rolled over and slapped the snooze button, allowing himself exactly 9 more minutes before the real day began. Through the thin walls of their house on Maple Street, he could hear the Kowalski's dog barking next door and the distant rumble of the early shift heading to the Willowbrook manufacturing plant. This was Owen Stone's world: predictable, challenging, and held together by sheer determination and love for his daughter. By 6 a.m., Owen was in the kitchen brewing coffee in the same chipped mug he'd used since high school, the one Emma had decorated with finger paints when she was 6. The kitchen itself told the story of their life-clean but worn linoleum floors that Owen kept promising to replace, appliances that were older than Emma but still functional thanks to his handy nature, and a refrigerator covered with her artwork, school photos, and the carefully maintained calendar that kept their lives organized. "Daddy, can I have pancakes?" Emma appeared in the doorway in her favorite purple pajamas, her auburn hair sticking up in impossible directions. She rubbed her eyes with small fists, still half asleep but already negotiating for a breakfast upgrade from their usual routine of cereal and toast. "It's Tuesday, sweetheart," Owen said gently, pulling the generic brand cornflakes from the cabinet. "Pancakes are for weekends, remember?" Emma's face fell, but she climbed onto her booster seat without argument. At 8 years old, she understood their routines and limitations better than most adults understood their own finances. She'd learned early that money was something that had to be carefully managed, that wants and needs were different things, and that her daddy worked very hard to provide for both of them. Owen poured milk over her cereal, the name brand kind, because that was one small luxury he refused to compromise. Anand sat down across from her with his own bowl and a cup of coffee that was stronger than most people could tolerate. These 15 minutes of breakfast together were sacred time in their household, a chance to connect before the day pulled them in different directions. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Mrs. Chun is teaching us about community helpers today," Emma said between spoonfuls, referring to her second-grade teacher at Willowbrook Elementary. "I told her my daddy is a carpenter who builds beautiful things and helps people fix their houses." Owen smiled, feeling that familiar warmth in his chest. "What else did you tell her?" "I said you're the strongest person in the world and that you saved a lady from a burning car yesterday." Emma's eyes were bright with pride, and Owen realized the accident had made a bigger impression on her than he'd thought. "I'm not the strongest person in the world, Em," he said, reaching over to smooth down her unruly curls. "I just did what anyone would do." "No," Emma said with the serious certainty that only 8-year-olds could muster. "Not everyone would run toward a fire. Mrs. Patterson said most people would be too scared." Owen sipped his coffee and studied his daughter's face, so much like Sarah's but with his own stubborn chin and thoughtful brown eyes. Sarah had always said Emma was wise beyond her years, and moments like this proved it. The tragedy of losing her mother so young had forced Emma to grow up faster than she should have, but it had also given her an understanding of what truly mattered in life. After breakfast, Owen walked Emma to school, 10-minute journey through their neighborhood that they both treasured. Willowbrook Heights wasn't fancy, but it was home. The houses were small and close together, most built in the 1940s for factory workers and their families. The lawns were tiny but well maintained, the gardens full of practical vegetables rather than ornamental flowers, and everyone knew everyone else's business in the way that small communities always did. "Morning, Owen," called Mrs. Patterson from her front porch, where she was watering a collection of potted plants that somehow thrived despite the industrial air quality. "Heard you were a hero yesterday." Word traveled fast in Willowbrook Heights. By the time Owen dropped Emma off at school, he'd fielded questions from 3 neighbors, the crossing guard, and Emma's teacher, all wanting to hear about the dramatic rescue. Owen deflected most of the attention. He wasn't comfortable being called a hero for doing what felt like basic human decency, but he appreciated the concern of his community. Willowbrook Elementary School was a solid brick building that had educated 3 generations of local families. The hallways smelled like disinfectant and childhood dreams, and the walls were covered with colorful student artwork and motivational posters about reaching for the stars. Emma's classroom was bright and welcoming, filled with beanbag reading, Corners and science projects that proved even small-town schools could nurture big imaginations. "Have a good day, sweetheart," Owen said, kissing the top of Emma's head as she joined her classmates for morning circle time. "I'll see you at 3:30. Okay? Love you, Daddy," Emma called back, already engrossed in showing her friend Maddie a new colored pencil she'd found in her backpack. Owen's workday began at Sterling Construction, a mid-sized company that handled everything from kitchen renovations to commercial building projects across the Willowbrook metropolitan area. Owen had started there right out of high school, working his way up from general laborer to master carpenter, and he took pride in the quality of his craftsmanship. His current project was a set of custom built-in bookshelves for a law office, downtown intricate work that required precision and artistry, the kind of job that reminded him why he loved working with his hands. The other guys at Sterling were good people, working class, men who understood the value of honest labor and the challenge of supporting families on blue-collar wages. They ribbed Owen good-naturedly about his rescue heroics, dubbing him Fire Chief Stone and asking if he was planning to abandon carpentry for a career with the fire department. "Just wrong place, right time," Owen insisted as he measured and cut pieces of red oak for the bookshelves. Anyone would have done the same thing. "Not everyone," said Mike Hernandez, Sterling's foreman and Owen's closest friend at work. "Takes guts to run toward fireman. You should feel good about what you did." But Owen wasn't thinking about feeling good. He was thinking about the bills stacking up on his kitchen counter, Emma's school photos that he wanted to order but couldn't quite afford, the heating system that would need repairs before winter, the college fund that grew slower than he'd hoped despite his careful budgeting. Being a single father meant every decision had long-term consequences, and there was no room for mistakes. During his lunch break, Owen sat in his truck eating a homemade sandwich and reading a text from the bank about his mortgage payment. Weren't behind. Owen was too careful for that, but they weren't getting ahead either. Every month was a careful balance between necessities and the small extras that made Emma's childhood special. Birthday parties at Chuck E. Cheese, new books from the school book fair, the occasional movie night with popcorn and candy. His phone buzzed with another message. This one from Emma's school about upcoming field trip fees, $25. Didn't sound like much, but it represented 2 hours of work after taxes, and Owen found himself doing the mental math that had become second nature. Could he pick up an extra side job this weekend? Maybe install some shelving for the neighbors? These were the thoughts that occupied Owen's mind as he worked through the afternoon, his hands moving with practiced precision while his brain juggled schedules and budgets. He'd become an expert at making every dollar stretch, every hour count. Every decision served the larger goal of giving Emma the best life possible within their means. At 3:25, Owen pulled up to the school pickup line, exactly on time as always. Reliability was one of the few luxuries he could afford to give his daughter. The knowledge that her father would always be where he said he'd be, when he said he'd be there. Emma bounded toward the truck with her usual enthusiasm, backpack bouncing and face bright with the day's adventures. "Daddy, guess what? Mrs. Chun showed us a newspaper article about car accidents, and she said sometimes people get something called amnesia, where they can't remember who they are. Isn't that weird?" Owen's hands tightened on the steering wheel as yesterday's rescue flashed through his mind. "Yeah, that is weird." As they drove home through the familiar streets of Willowbrook Heights, Emma chattering about her day and the radio playing classic rock at low volume, Owen found himself wondering about the woman he'd pulled from the burning car. Was she okay? Had she woken up? Did she remember what happened? More importantly, why couldn't he shake the feeling that their brief encounter had been more than just a random moment of crisis? Something about her face, even bloodied and unconscious, had seemed familiar in a way that didn't make sense, given their completely different worlds. That evening, as Owen helped Emma with homework and prepared their simple dinner of spaghetti and meat sauce, he caught himself glancing at the local news on his phone. looking for any mention of the accident or the woman's condition. But there was nothing, just the usual stories about city council meetings and high school sports. Their world continued in its predictable rhythm: homework, dinner, bath time, bedtime stories, and finally Owen's quiet hour of evening solitude, when he paid bills, planned the next day's work, and sometimes allowed himself to dream about the future he wanted to build for Emma. A future with fewer money worries, more opportunities, maybe even the chance to travel like Sarah had always wanted. But as Owen settled into bed that night, his last thought wasn't about future dreams or present challenges. It was about a woman with dark hair and a diamond necklace worth more than his house, and the nagging certainty that their story was far from over. 6 months earlier, Natalia Hayes had stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her corner office on the 42nd floor of the Pinnacle Tower in downtown Meridian City, looking out over an empire she had built from nothing. At 31, she was the youngest female CEO in the Fortune 500, commanding a technology conglomerate worth $12 billion and employing over 50,000 people worldwide. The view from her office encompassed the entire financial district, gleaming skyscrapers that housed banks, investment firms, and corporate headquarters, all connected by a web of power and influence that Natalia navigated with the skill of a master chess player. Her reflection in the window showed a woman in a perfectly tailored Armani suit, her dark hair pulled back in an elegant chignon, diamond earrings catching the afternoon light as she reviewed quarterly reports that would determine the fate of thousands of jobs. Hayes Technology Solutions had been her vision, built from a small software development company she'd inherited from her adoptive father when she was just 23. Most people had expected the young woman to sell the struggling business and live comfortably off the proceeds. Instead, Natalia had thrown herself into learning every aspect of the company, working 18-hour days to understand programming, marketing, finance, and corporate strategy. Her penthouse apartment in the exclusive Meridian Heights district reflected the success of those efforts. Minimalist design showcased priceless art collections, while smart home technology controlled everything from lighting to temperature with voice commands. The kitchen was a monument to German engineering that Natalia rarely used, since most of her meals were either business dinners at 5-star restaurants or delivered by her personal assistant to whatever conference room had claimed her attention that day. The loneliness of her success was something Natalia rarely acknowledged, even to herself. Relationships had become increasingly difficult as her wealth and power grew. Men either felt intimidated by her achievements or were clearly interested in her money rather than her as a person. Her social circle consisted mainly of other executives and board members, people who understood the demands of her position but shared her workaholic tendencies rather than offering balance or emotional connection. The signature diamond necklace she wore had been a gift to herself on her 30th birthday, a custom creation from Cartier that cost more than most people's annual salaries. The intricate pattern of perfectly matched stones spelled out NH in a design so subtle that only she knew the meaning. It had become her trademark, photographed for magazine covers and society pages, a symbol of her success that she wore like armor against a world that often seemed to view her as more symbol than person. Natalia's assistant, Jennifer Morrison, knocked softly on the office door before entering with the day's final briefing. Jennifer had been with the company for 8 years, one of the few people who remembered when Natalia was still learning the ropes and making decisions based on instinct rather than market research. The Henderson merger paperwork is ready for your signature, Jennifer said, placing a leather portfolio on the mahogany desk. Legal wants to finalize everything before the weekend. And your mother called. She wanted to remind you about dinner Sunday at the country club. Natalia's relationship with Margaret Hayes, the woman who had adopted her at age 5, was complicated. Margaret meant well, but she lived in a different world of charity luncheons and social expectations. constantly pressuring Natalia to settle down with an appropriate young man and focus on building a family rather than a business empire. The irony wasn't lost on Natalia that the woman who had raised her to be independent now seemed disappointed by just how independent she'd become. "Tell Mother I'll try to make it," Natalia said, knowing she probably wouldn't. Sunday dinners at the Meridian Country Club were exercises in polite conversation about people she didn't care about, peppered with Margaret's not-so-subtle hints about grandchildren and the importance of work-life balance. As Jennifer left the office, Natalia returned to the windows, watching the city lights begin to twinkle as evening approached. Down below, thousands of people were heading home to families, to friends, to lives that existed outside corporate boardrooms and quarterly earnings reports. Sometimes Natalia wondered what that felt like, to have someone waiting for you, someone whose day was made better simply by your presence. The truth was that Natalia Hayes was brilliant at building companies, but struggled with building relationships. She could negotiate billion-dollar deals with ruthless efficiency, but small talk with potential romantic partners left her feeling awkward and exposed. Her success had created a barrier between her and normal human experiences, leaving her wealthy beyond measure, but emotionally impoverished. Her phone buzzed with the familiar ping of an encrypted message, something that had been happening more frequently in recent weeks. Natalia had been receiving strange communications, warnings about corporate espionage, and hints that someone within her organization might be working against her. The messages were always anonymous, always vague, but they carried an undertone of urgency that she couldn't ignore. The latest message was more specific than usual. "They know about the Phoenix Protocol. Get out of the city. Trust no one in your inner circle." Phoenix Protocol was Natalia's most closely guarded secret, a revolutionary artificial intelligence system that could predict market movements with unprecedented accuracy. Only 5 people in the company knew of its existence, and the commercial applications were worth hundreds of billions of dollars. If someone was planning to steal or sabotage the project, the implications went far beyond corporate espionage. Natalia had been planning to drive to her private cabin in the mountains that weekend, a remote retreat where she could think clearly and review the Phoenix files without the distractions of city life. The anonymous warnings had made that trip feel less like a retreat and more like a necessity. But as she gathered her things to leave the office that fateful Friday evening, Natalia couldn't have known that she would never see her corner office again. She couldn't have predicted that within hours, Natalia Hayes, the CEO, would cease to exist, replaced by a confused woman with no memory of boardrooms or billion-dollar decisions. The last thing she remembered clearly was driving her BMW sedan through the industrial district, taking a circuitous route to avoid the Friday evening traffic that clogged the main highways. She'd been on the phone with her head of security, discussing the anonymous threats and whether they warranted hiring additional protection for key executives. "I think you're taking this too seriously," Derek Wilson had said through the cars. BLUETO, Otis system. Probably just some disgruntled employee trying to cause panic. But Natalia's instincts, honed by years of navigating corporate warfare, told her the threats were real. Someone wanted her out of the picture, and they were willing to go to considerable lengths to make it happen. The industrial district was largely empty on Friday evenings, which was why Natalia preferred the route despite its rougher roads and stark scenery. She'd been adjusting her rearview mirror when she noticed the black SUV that had been following her for the past several miles. When she changed lanes, it changed lanes. When she slowed down, it maintained its distance. Natalia's heart rate spiked as she realized the anonymous warnings might have been more than idle threats. She pressed harder on the accelerator, her luxury sedan responding smoothly as she tried to put distance between herself and the pursuing vehicle. But as she rounded a curve near the Willowbrook Industrial District, the SUV suddenly accelerated, ramming into her rear bumper with tremendous force. The impact sent her car spinning across The wet asphalt, tires screaming as she fought to regain control. But physics and momentum won the battle, sending her BMW tumbling end over end before landing on its roof in a shower of sparks and broken glass. The last thing Natalia Hayes remembered was the smell of gasoline and the distant sound of footsteps approaching her demolished vehicle. When she next opened her eyes, she would be in a hospital bed with no memory of stock options or board meetings, no recollection of the empire she'd built or the enemies who had tried to destroy her. The woman who had once commanded the attention of world leaders would be asking a nurse for help remembering her own name. But in that final moment of consciousness, as darkness closed in around her, Natalia's last thought wasn't about business or money or power. It was a simple, human wish that she'd allowed herself more time for the things that really mattered: love, family, connection. The things that couldn't be bought or negotiated, only given and received. The diamond necklace that had symbolized her success lay against her throat as the car began to smoke, its intricate pattern of stones catching the last rays of evening sunlight. Soon, it would be the only clue to her true identity, a breadcrumb trail leading back to a life she could no longer remember living. Owen Stone had never been inside Meridian General Hospital except for the night Emma was born and the terrible weeks when Sarah was dying. The sterile hallways and antiseptic smell brought back memories he tried to keep buried, but something had compelled him to return to check on the woman he'd pulled from the burning car. It had been 3 days since the accident, and Owen couldn't explain the nagging feeling that had been eating at him. Maybe it was the way she'd looked so peaceful despite the chaos, or maybe it was that distinctive diamond necklace that seemed vaguely familiar in a way he couldn't place. Whatever the reason, he found himself asking at the information desk about Jane Doe from the Highway 47 accident. Room 314, the volunteer said, checking her computer. But visiting hours end at 8 and family only after 6. Owen glanced at his watch. 7:45 p.m. He'd dropped Emma off at Mrs. Patterson's for their weekly movie night, giving him a rare evening of freedom. "I'm the one who pulled her from the car," he explained. "I just wanted to make sure she's okay." The elevator ride to the 3rd floor gave Owen time to question his decision. What was he doing here? The woman was clearly from a different world. Expensive car, designer clothes, jewelry that cost more than he made in a year. She probably had family and friends who were taking care of her, people from her own social circle who understood her life in ways he never could. But when he reached room 314, Owen discovered the woman was alone. She was awake, sitting up in bed and staring out the window at the city skyline with an expression of complete bewilderment. The diamond necklace was gone, presumably locked away with her other belongings, and without it she looked younger, more vulnerable. A bandage covered the gash on her forehead, and her dark hair hung loose around her shoulders. "Excuse me," Owen said softly, knocking on the open doorframe. "I'm Owen Stone. I was there when your car crashed." She turned toward him with eyes that were alert but confused, as if she was seeing the world through someone else's vision. "You're the one who saved me," she said, her voice raspy from smoke inhalation. "The nurse told me. Thank you." Owen stepped into the room, surprised by how small and lost she seemed in the hospital bed. This was clearly someone accustomed to being in control, but the accident had stripped away all her usual armor. "How are you feeling?" "Confused," she admitted with a weak smile. "The doctors say I have amnesia. I can't remember anything about the accident, or, well, anything really. They've been calling me Jane Doe because I don't remember my own name." Owen felt a chill run down his spine. "Nothing at all?" "I remember general things, what a car is, how to read, basic knowledge about the world. But personal memories? My name, where I live, what I do for work." She shook her head. "It's all gone. Like someone erased part of my brain and left only the instruction manual." Owen pulled a chair closer to her bed, struck by how articulate she was despite her confusion. Even without her memories, this woman carried herself with an intelligence and poise that spoke of education and success. "The doctors say it might come back." "They say a lot of things," she replied with a slight bitterness. "Traumatic brain injury, retrograde amnesia, possible psychological trauma. But they don't know when or if my memories will return. For now, I'm just nobody." The sadness in her voice hit Owen unexpectedly hard. He thought about Emma, about how his daughter's entire identity was built on memories of her mother, their life together, the stories that connected her to her past. To lose all of that, to wake up as a blank slate in a world full of strangers, seemed like a special kind of hell. "You're not nobody," Owen said gently. "You're someone who survived a terrible accident. Someone who's strong enough to be sitting here talking to me instead of ... He didn't finish the sentence, but they both knew how close she'd come to dying. She studied his face with an intensity that made Owen slightly uncomfortable. "Why did you come back? I mean, you saved my life, but you don't know me. Most people would consider their good deed done." Owen wasn't sure how to answer that question honestly. "I couldn't stop thinking about the accident. Something about it didn't feel random." Her expression sharpened. "What do you mean?" "I've lived in Willowbrook my whole life," Owen explained. "That stretch of Highway 47 where you crashed. It's not exactly on the way to anywhere important. Industrial district. Mostly abandoned warehouses and old factories. What were you doing out there?" "I wish I could tell you," she said, frustration evident in her voice. "The police asked me the same thing. They found my car registration, but the address listed is some corporate office downtown. No personal information, no emergency contacts. It's like I was trying to disappear." Owen leaned forward in his chair. "What kind of car was it?" "BMW 750i, they said. Only a few months old." She paused, seeming to realize the implication. "I must have money, right? You don't drive a car like that unless you're pretty well off." "But I don't feel wealthy. I mean, I don't remember feeling wealthy. Do you remember anything about your life? Your job, your family?" She closed her eyes, concentrating. "Sometimes. I get flashes. Boardrooms, maybe. People in suits sitting around a long table. But it's vague, like trying to remember a dream after you wake up." She opened her eyes and looked at Owen. "The strangest thing is that I feel like I should know you. When you walked in here, something about your face seemed familiar." Owen's pulse quickened. "I felt the same way when I pulled you from the car. Like I'd seen you somewhere before." They sat in silence for a moment, both grappling with the implications of their shared recognition. Finally, she spoke again. "The necklace I was wearing, the nurses mentioned it was quite valuable. I asked to see it, but they said it's locked. In the hospital safe until they can confirm my identity." "It was beautiful," Owen said carefully. "Very distinctive. Like nothing I'd ever seen before. Can you describe it?" Owen tried to recall the details from those chaotic moments. Diamonds, lots of them, arranged in some kind of pattern. It caught the emergency lights even through all the smoke. "Must be worth a fortune." She nodded slowly. "I keep thinking that. Necklace might be the key to everything. If it's as unique as everyone says, someone must recognize it. Someone must know who I am." A nurse appeared in the doorway, checking her watch pointedly. "Visiting hours are over, sir." Owen stood reluctantly. Something about this woman drew him in, not just her beauty or the mystery surrounding her, but something deeper. An intelligence and strength that shone through despite her vulnerable circumstances. "Will you be okay here alone?" "I'll have to be," she said with a sad smile. "The social worker says they're trying to track down my identity through the car registration and other records. But it's taking time. Until then, I'm just Jane Doe in room 314. As Owen walked toward the door, she called after him. Would you mind coming back? I know it's strange, asking a stranger to visit, but you're the only person I've met who doesn't look at me like I'm a medical curiosity. Plus, you might be the key to figuring out who I am." "Of course," Owen said, without hesitation. "I'll come back tomorrow after work." The drive home through Willowbrook Heights gave Owen time to process what he'd learned. The woman's amnesia explained some things but raised new questions. Why had she been driving through the industrial district? Why was her car registration linked to a corporate address rather than a home? And why did they both feel this strange sense of recognition? Back in his kitchen, Owen made himself a cup of coffee and sat at the table where he usually paid bills and helped Emma with homework. Instead of reviewing invoices or planning the next day's work schedule, he found himself sketching the diamond necklace from memory, trying to capture the intricate pattern he'd glimpsed in those brief moments. The design was definitely custom work, probably one of a kind. If he could remember the pattern clearly enough, maybe he could help identify it. Maybe he could help her figure out who she really was. As he worked on the sketch, adding details as they came back to him, Owen couldn't shake the feeling that he was being drawn into something much larger than a random act of heroism. The anonymous woman in room 314 represented a mystery that went beyond simple amnesia, and for reasons he couldn't explain, Owen Stone was becoming determined to solve it. By the time he went to bed that night, Owen had filled 3 pages with different attempts to capture the necklace's design. None of them felt quite right, but one sketch in particular nagged at him, a pattern that seemed almost like letters or symbols hidden within the elaborate arrangement of diamonds. He'd definitely seen that necklace before, Owen realized as he drifted off to sleep. The question was where, and more importantly, what it meant for the woman who had no memory of ever owning it. Over the next 2 weeks, Owen found himself visiting room 314 every evening after work, usually staying until the nurses politely reminded him that visiting hours were over. What had started as simple concern for the woman he'd saved was evolving into something more complex, a genuine friendship that surprised both of them with its easy comfort and natural conversation. She had chosen to call herself Sarah, partly because she needed some kind of name for the medical staff to use, but mostly because it felt right somehow. "It just sounds like me," she'd explained to Owen on his 3rd visit. "Or at least like who I think I might be." Owen's throat had tightened. When she chose that name, his late wife had been Sarah too, but he didn't mention the coincidence. There was something almost sacred about the way this new Sarah was rebuilding her identity from scratch, piece by careful piece, and he didn't want to complicate that process with his own emotional baggage. The hospital had become their unlikely meeting ground. Room 314 transformed from a sterile medical space into something more personal. Sarah had asked the staff to move her chair closer to the window so she could watch the city lights in the evening, and Owen usually brought coffee from the vending machine. Terrible hospital coffee that somehow tasted perfect when shared with someone who appreciated the simple gesture. "Tell me about your daughter again," Sarah said one evening as they watched the sunset paint the downtown skyline in shades of orange and pink. Owen had mentioned Emma on several visits, and Sarah always seemed particularly interested in hearing about their life together. "She's 8, Owen said, pulling out his phone to show Sarah the latest photos. "Smart as a whip, kind heart, and stubborn as her old man. She wants to be an artist when she grows up, or maybe a teacher. Changes her mind every week." Sarah studied the photos with an intensity that spoke of someone hungry for connection to the normal world outside her hospital room. "She's beautiful. She has your eyes, but something about her smile." Sarah paused, a flicker of confusion crossing her face. "I feel like I should know something about children, about what it's like to care for them." "Maybe you have kids of your own," Owen suggested gently. This possibility had occurred to both of them, and it added an urgency to the search for Sarah's identity. Somewhere someone might be missing her desperately. "The social worker says there's no record of dependents in my car registration or insurance," Information, Sarah replied. But that doesn't mean anything. My whole life is apparently a mystery. Owen had been doing his own research, spending his lunch breaks at the Willowbrook Public Library using their computers to search for missing persons reports and news stories about car accidents. So far, he'd found nothing. It was as if Sarah had simply materialized from thin air on that rainy evening 2 weeks ago. What about your work? Owen asked. You mentioned flashes of boardrooms and business meetings. Sarah closed her eyes, concentrating the way she always did when trying to access her buried memories. It's frustrating, she said after a moment. I know things about business. I can read financial reports. I understand corporate structure. I even caught an error in the hospital's billing statement. But I can't remember where I learned any of it. This kind of retained knowledge fascinated Owen. Sarah might not remember her personal history, but her professional skills remained intact. She could discuss market trends with the sophistication of someone who'd spent years in the business world, yet she couldn't remember her own last name. The detective working my case thinks I might be some kind of executive or consultant, Sarah continued, high level, based on the car and the jewelry. But there's no missing person report matching my description, which he says is unusual for someone who would presumably be missed at work. Owen had been wondering about that too. If Sarah was as successful as the evidence suggested, wouldn't someone have noticed her absence by now? Wouldn't there be concerned colleagues, worried friends, panicked family members searching for her? Unless someone didn't want her to be found. Sarah, Owen said carefully, what if your amnesia isn't just from the accident? What if someone wanted you to disappear? She turned from the window to look at him directly. You mean like ... intentionally? The location where you crashed, the fact that no one's reported you missing, the way your car registration leads to a dead end. It all seems pretty convenient for someone who might want you out of the picture. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, processing this possibility. The police detective mentioned that my car showed signs of impact damage that didn't match the accident scene. Like someone had rammed me from behind before I lost control. Owen felt a chill. You think someone tried to kill you? I think someone tried to make me disappear, Sarah said slowly. And they almost succeeded, if you hadn't been there. She didn't finish the sentence, but they both understood how close she'd come to dying in that burning car. This revelation changed everything. What Owen had assumed was a random accident was starting to look like attempted murder, which meant Sarah might still be in danger. It also meant that her amnesia, while genuine, might be protecting her from whoever had tried to harm her. We need to be careful about how we search for your identity, Owen said. If someone dangerous is looking for you, we don't want to lead them straight to this hospital room. Over the following days, Owen and Sarah developed their own investigation strategy. Instead of working through official channels, they focused on the one piece of evidence that seemed most likely to yield answers, the distinctive diamond necklace. That was still locked in the hospital safe. Owen had brought his sketches of the necklace's design, and together they worked to refine the details. Sarah's artistic eye caught nuances that Owen had missed, and gradually they produced a more accurate representation of the intricate pattern. These aren't random designs, Sarah realized during one of their drawing sessions. Look at how the diamonds are arranged. It's almost like they're forming letters or symbols. Owen studied their latest sketch with fresh eyes. You're right. If you look at it this way, that cluster could be an N, and this section might be an H. NH, Sarah repeated. My initials? Could be. Or they could stand for something else. Entirely. Their investigation took on new urgency when Dr. Rebecca Martinez, Sarah's neurologist, delivered concerning news during Owen's evening visit. We're getting pressure from the hospital administration to discharge her, Dr. Martinez explained quietly. She's medically stable, but without insurance information or family to take responsibility. The financial department is getting nervous. Where would she go? Owen asked, glancing at Sarah, who was pretending to sleep but obviously listening to every word. There are state facilities for people in her situation, Dr. Martinez said diplomatically, but they're not ideal environments for someone recovering from traumatic brain injury. Owen's mind raced. Sarah needed time and safety to recover her memories, not the chaos of an underfunded state facility. She needed stability and people who cared about her well-being. She needed ... She could stay with us, Owen said, surprising himself with the words, temporarily, I mean. Just until she gets her memory back or until we figure out who she really is. Dr. Martinez raised her eyebrows. Mr. Stone, that's very generous, but you barely know this woman. And if she's really in some kind of danger, ... then she needs people looking out for her, Owen finished. I've got a spare bedroom, and my daughter Emma would love the company. It might actually help Sarah's recovery to be in a normal home environment, instead of an institution. Sarah's eyes opened, and Owen could see tears threatening to spill over. You would do that? Take in a complete stranger? You're not a complete stranger, Owen said simply. Not anymore. That night, Owen called his neighbor Mrs. Patterson to discuss the situation. The elderly woman had helped him through some of his darkest days after his wife's death, and her practical wisdom had always guided him through difficult decisions. Bringing a woman with amnesia into your home? Mrs. Patterson said over her kitchen table, where she'd invited Owen for coffee. And her famous apple pie. It's either the kindest thing I've ever heard or the craziest. Maybe both, Owen admitted. But Mrs. Patterson, you should see her. She's lost and scared, but there's something special about her. Something that makes me think she's meant to be part of our lives. Mrs. Patterson studied Owen's face with the shrewd eyes of someone who'd raised 6 children and buried 2 husbands. You're falling for her, aren't you? Owen started to protest, then stopped. I care about her. More than I expected to. But it's not just that. Emma needs to see that there are good people in the world. People worth helping, even when it's complicated. And what if her memory comes back and she turns out to be someone completely different than who you think she is? Then we'll deal with that when it happens, Owen said. But right now, she needs help, and I'm in a position to give it. Isn't that what my Sarah would have wanted me to do? Mrs. Patterson reached across the table and patted Owen's hand. Your Sarah would be proud of the man you've become and the father you are to Emma. If you think this is right, then I trust your judgment. 2 days later, Owen signed the necessary paperwork to become Sarah's temporary guardian, and Dr. Martinez approved her discharge into his care. As they walked out of Meridian General Hospital together, Sarah carrying a small bag of belongings that represented her entire known world, Owen couldn't help but feel that they were crossing some kind of threshold. Thank you, Sarah said as they reached Owen's pickup truck. I know this is complicated and potentially dangerous, and I know you're doing it for someone you barely know. I know you better than you think, Owen replied, opening the passenger door for her. And besides, Emma's been asking about the lady Daddy saved every single day. She's going to be thrilled to finally meet you. As they drove through the familiar streets of Willowbrook Heights toward the little house on Maple Street, Owen found himself wondering what their life would look like with Sarah in it. Would she fit into their quiet routines? Would Emma take to her? Would they be able to unlock the mystery of her identity before whoever had tried to hurt her figured out where she'd gone? But looking at Sarah's face as she took in the neighborhood modest houses with well-tended gardens, children playing on sidewalks, the comfortable chaos of working-class family life, Owen thought he saw something like recognition in her eyes. Not memory, exactly, but a sense of belonging that went deeper than conscious recollection. Maybe, just maybe, Sarah was exactly where she was supposed to be. Sarah had been living in the Stone household for 3 weeks when the first signs of trouble began to surface. What had started as a temporary arrangement to help her recover was evolving into something more complex, and Owen found himself caught between his growing feelings for Sarah and his protective instincts as a father. Emma had taken to Sarah immediately, following her around the house like a devoted puppy and insisting that Sarah help with everything from homework to bedtime stories. Sarah, for her part, seemed to have natural instincts with Emma that suggested she'd spent time around young people before, though she couldn't remember when or how. "Sarah, can you help me with my math?" Emma would call out every afternoon when Owen picked her up from school, and Sarah would settle beside her at the kitchen table with infinite patience, explaining multiplication tables in ways that made perfect sense to an 8-year-old mind. "I think I might have been a teacher," Sarah confided to Owen one evening as they cleaned up after dinner. "Emma's questions don't frustrate me the way they probably should. It feels natural, helping her learn." Owen had been thinking the same thing, but he'd also noticed other behaviors that suggested Sarah's background was more complex than elementary education. She automatically straightened picture frames, organized closets with military precision, and had strong opinions about financial news that suggested sophisticated business knowledge. More troubling was the way Sarah sometimes seemed to take charge of household decisions without realizing it. She'd rearranged the kitchen for better efficiency, organized Owen's workshop tools in a way that made perfect sense but felt presumptuous, and had even started making grocery lists based on nutritional analysis rather than budget considerations. "Sarah," Owen said gently one morning as she prepared to walk Emma to school, "you don't have to do everything. You're recovering from a serious injury, and you're supposed to be resting." "I feel fine," Sarah insisted, helping Emma pack her backpack with the thoroughness of a military quartermaster. "Besides, I like feeling useful. It's better than sitting around trying to remember a life that might not even be worth remembering." "But," Owen could see the strain in her eyes, the way she pushed herself to be helpful, even when exhaustion was clear in every line of her body. She was trying too hard to earn her place in their home, as if afraid they might ask her to leave if she wasn't constantly contributing. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening when Owen arrived home from work to find Sarah reorganizing his financial documents at the kitchen table. Bank statements, utility bills, and Emma's college fund information were spread across the surface in neat, categorized piles. "What are you doing?" Owen asked, his voice sharper than he'd intended. Sarah looked up in surprise. "I was just trying to help. I noticed some inconsistencies in your budget, and I thought I could streamline your expense tracking. You're overpaying for insurance, and Emma's college fund could be earning better returns if you switch to a different investment strategy." Owen felt heat rising in his chest. "Those are private documents, Sarah." "I know, but—" "No," Owen interrupted, beginning to gather the papers. "You don't know. You don't know anything about our situation, our history, or what we can and can't afford. This isn't your responsibility." Sarah's face flushed. "I was just trying to help. You've done so much for me, and I wanted to give something back. By going through my personal finances, by telling me how to manage money I've been handling on my own for 3 years. The argument escalated quickly, fueled by weeks of unspoken tension and the fundamental weirdness of their situation. Emma appeared in the doorway, drawn by the raised voices, and Owen immediately felt guilty for fighting in front of his daughter. "I'm sorry," Sarah said, standing up from the table. "You're right, I overstepped. I just ... I feel useless here, like I'm taking up space in your life, without contributing anything meaningful." "That's not what this is about," Owen said, but even as he spoke, he realized it was exactly what this was about. Sarah's instinctive competence in areas where he struggled made him feel inadequate, reminded him of all the ways he was falling short as a single parent. "Isn't it?" Sarah challenged. "You're proud, Owen. Too proud to accept help from someone you think is charity case. Well, here's a news flash. Maybe I'm not some helpless victim. Maybe I'm someone who's used to solving problems and making things better. Maybe you are, Owen shot back. Maybe you're some high-powered executive who's used to telling people what to do and having them thank you for it. But this is my house, my family, my responsibility. The words hung in the air between them, sharp and hurtful. Emma's eyes were wide with confusion and fear, and Owen immediately regretted letting his pride and insecurity drive the conversation to this point. You're right, Sarah said quietly. This is your family. And I'm just someone you pulled from a burning car who's overstayed her welcome. She turned and walked toward the spare bedroom, and Owen heard the door close with a soft click that sounded final. Emma remained in the doorway, looking between her father and the hallway where Sarah had disappeared. Daddy, why were you yelling at Sarah? Emma asked, her voice small and worried. Owen knelt down to his daughter's level, struggling to find words that would make sense to an 8-year-old. Sometimes grown-ups disagree about things, sweetheart. We weren't really mad at each other, we were both just frustrated. Are you going to make Sarah go away? The question hit Owen like a physical blow. In the 3 weeks Sarah had been with them, Emma had blossomed in ways Owen hadn't seen since her mother died. She laughed more, asked more questions, seemed more confident and secure. The thought of taking that away from his daughter, or from himself, was almost unbearable. I don't know, Em, Owen answered honestly. It's complicated. That night, Owen lay in bed staring at the ceiling and replaying the argument in his mind. Sarah had been right about several things. His budget could be more efficient. Emma's college fund could earn better returns, and he was overpaying for insurance. But accepting her help felt like admitting he couldn't handle his own life, and Owen's pride had been the only thing keeping him afloat since Sarah's death. The next morning, Owen found a note on the kitchen counter, written in Sarah's precise handwriting. Owen, I've arranged to stay at the women's shelter downtown until I can figure out my next steps. Please don't worry about me. Thank you for everything you've done. Emma is lucky to have you as a father. Sarah. Owen rushed to the spare bedroom to find it empty, the bed neatly made, and no sign that Sarah had ever lived there, except for the faint scent of her shampoo lingering in the air. Emma cried when Owen told her Sarah had left. And nothing, he said, could comfort her. She was like having a mom again. Emma sobbed into his shoulder. Why did you make her go away? Owen called the women's shelter, but they confirmed Sarah was there, and had asked not to be contacted. The volunteer on the phone was polite, but firm Sarah was safe. She was receiving counseling services, and she needed space to figure out her situation. For the next week, Owen threw himself into work with desperate intensity, taking on extra projects and staying late to avoid coming home to a house that felt empty despite Emma's presence. His productivity impressed his boss, but Mike Hernandez, the foreman who'd become Owen's closest friend, noticed the change in his demeanor. You look like hell, man, Mike said during lunch break on the following Friday. What's eating you? Owen found himself telling Mike the whole story: the accident, Sarah's amnesia, their investigation into her identity, the growing feelings he'd been afraid to acknowledge, and the pride that had driven her away. So let me get this straight, Mike said when Owen finished. You found a smart, beautiful woman who's great with your kid, who wants to help make your life better, and you kicked her out because she tried to help make your life better. It's more complicated than that. No, it's not, Mike said bluntly. You're scared. Your wife died, and you've been protecting yourself and Emma by not letting anyone get too close. This Sarah comes along and suddenly you're feeling things you thought you'd never feel again. So you picked a fight to drive her away before she could hurt you. Owen wanted to argue, but the truth of Mike's words hit too close to home. What if her memory comes back and she's completely different than who I think she is? What if it doesn't? Mike countered. What if she's exactly who she seems to be, and you just threw away the best thing that's happened to you since Sarah died? That evening, Owen sat Emma down for a serious conversation about Sarah, about love, and about the fear that sometimes made people push away the things they wanted most. "I think you should go get her," Emma said, with the direct wisdom that only 8-year-olds possessed. "And tell her you're sorry, and ask her to come home." "What if she doesn't want to come back?" Emma considered this seriously. "Then at least you'll know you tried." "Mama always said trying was the most important thing." Owen smiled despite his heavy heart. His daughter was right, as usual. It was time to swallow his pride and fight for the woman who had somehow become essential to their family in just 3 weeks. But first, he needed to make sure Sarah was safe. Because if his suspicions were correct, the people who had tried to make her disappear once might not be finished with her yet. Owen's fears about Sarah's safety proved prophetic when Detective Ray Alvarez called him on a Tuesday morning with news that made his blood run cold. Sarah had disappeared from the women's shelter, and this time there were clear signs of foul play. "Security cameras show a man approaching her around 9 p.m. last night," Detective Alvarez explained over the phone. "Medium height, dark clothing, baseball cap pulled low. Ms. Doe, or Sarah, as you call her, seemed to recognize him. They talked for about 2 minutes, then left together. She didn't return to her room." Owen's hands tightened around his phone. "Did she go willingly?" "That's the million-dollar question," Alvarez said. "The footage is grainy, but it doesn't look like force was involved. However, her belongings are still in her room, including the clothes she was wearing when she left the hospital. That suggests she wasn't planning to be gone long." Owen closed, his eyes fighting the panic that threatened to overwhelm him. He'd let his pride drive Sarah away at the exact moment she needed protection most. If something happened to her because he'd been too stubborn to swallow his ego, double quotes, "What can I do to help?" Owen asked. "We're treating this as a potential kidnapping, but we need more information about her background. I know you've been working on identifying her. Have you found anything new?" Owen thought about the diamond necklace sketches he and Sarah had worked on together, the pattern that seemed to form letters. "Detective, the necklace she was wearing, is it still in the hospital safe?" "Should be." "Why?" "Sarah and I think the design might be her initials. NH worked into the diamond pattern. If that's true, maybe we can trace it back to the jeweler who made it." "That's actually not a bad idea," Alvarez admitted. "Custom jewelry like that would have records. I'll pull the necklace from evidence and see what we can find." After hanging up, Owen stared at his phone, feeling helpless in a way he hadn't experienced since the days when his Sarah was dying, and there was nothing he could do to save her. History was repeating itself, and once again he was watching someone he loved slip away while he stood powerless on the sidelines. But this time was different. This time, he could fight back. Owen called in sick to work and drove straight to the women's shelter, where he convinced the manager to let him examine Sarah's room. Her few belongings told a story of someone trying to rebuild an identity from scratch. Library books about amnesia and brain injury, notebook pages filled with memory exercises, and the sketches they'd made together of the diamond necklace, hidden beneath her pillow. Owen found something the police had missed, a small piece of paper with a phone number written in Sarah's handwriting. Below the number she'd written, "NH Phoenix, trust no one." Owen's heart raced. NH could be her initials, but Phoenix might be a code name or location. And trust no one suggested Sarah had remembered something important, something dangerous. Enough that she'd felt the need to hide the information. He called the number from his cell phone, but it went straight to a generic voicemail message. However, caller ID showed the number was registered to a law firm in downtown Meridian City, Crawford, Mitchell and Associates. The law office was located in the prestigious Pinnacle Tower, a gleaming skyscraper that housed some of the city's most powerful corporations. Owen felt out of place in his work clothes among the suited executives and marble lobbies, but desperation gave him courage. "I need to speak with someone about this phone number," Owen told the receptionist, showing her The paper from Sarah's room. It's connected to a missing person case. The receptionist's professional smile faltered when she saw the number. I'll need to get Mr. Crawford. One moment, please. James Crawford turned out to be a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and the careful demeanor of someone who dealt in secrets for a living. He studied Owen with sharp eyes that missed nothing. You said this involves a missing person? Crawford asked. Owen explained about Sarah's amnesia, her disappearance from the shelter, and the hidden note with Crawford's number. As he spoke, Crawford's expression grew increasingly troubled. The woman you're describing, Crawford said carefully. Can you tell me about the necklace she was wearing? Owen pulled out his sketches, and Crawford's face went pale. Dear God, the lawyer whispered. It's really her. We thought she was dead. Who? Owen demanded. Who is she? Crawford looked around nervously, then led Owen into a private conference room and locked the door. The woman you know as Sarah is Natalia Hayes, CEO of Hayes Technology Solutions. She's been missing for 6 months, presumed dead after her car was found burned out in a ravine. Owen felt the world tilt. CEO? But she doesn't remember any of that. Because someone tried very hard to make sure she never would, Crawford sighed grimly. Natalia came to me 3 days before she disappeared. She'd been receiving anonymous threats, warnings that someone in her inner circle was planning to kill her and make it look like an accident. Phoenix, Owen said, remembering the note. She wrote something about Phoenix. Crawford's eyes widened. Phoenix Protocol. It's a revolutionary AI system Natalia's company developed, worth billions if it falls into the wrong hands. She suspected someone was planning to steal it and eliminate her to cover their tracks. The pieces began falling into place for Owen. So they staged her death, but she survived with amnesia. They thought they were safe until she started recovering her memory, Crawford finished. Someone must have been watching the hospital, the shelter. The moment she showed signs of remembering who she really is. Owen's phone rang. Detective Alvarez. Owen, we've got a problem. The necklace is gone from the hospital safe. Someone with administrative access removed it 2 hours ago, along with all documentation of its existence. They're covering their tracks, Owen told Crawford after relating the detective's news. Which means they have Sarah, and they're going to finish what they started 6 months ago. Crawford was already reaching for his phone. I'm calling the FBI. Corporate espionage, attempted murder, kidnapping. This is way beyond local police jurisdiction. But Owen was thinking about Emma, about what would happen to his daughter if he lost another person he loved to forces beyond his control. He was thinking about Sarah's courage in facing her shattered memories, her kindness with Emma, the way she'd tried to build a life from nothing. How long before the FBI can mobilize? Owen asked. Hours, maybe longer, Crawford admitted. These things take time. Sarah doesn't have time, Owen said grimly. Do you have any idea where they might take her? Crawford hesitated, then pulled out a file. Natalia owned a private research facility about an hour outside the city. Officially it was sold 6 months ago, but the purchase might have been front if someone wanted to interrogate her about Phoenix Protocol in complete isolation. Owen was already heading for the door. Give me the address. You can't go alone, Crawford protested. These people have already tried to kill her once. Then I'll make sure they don't get a second chance, Owen said with a determination that surprised even him. An hour later, Owen was parked outside a chain-link fence surrounding a seemingly abandoned industrial complex. The sign read Meridian Research Associates, but the parking lot was empty except for 3 black SUVs that looked like the kind of vehicles corporate security might use. Owen's carpenter training kicked in as he studied the facility's layout. Multiple buildings connected by covered walkways, limited access points, security cameras at key locations. If Sarah was inside, Getting to her would require more than just courage. It would take planning and precision. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. If you want to see Sarah alive, come to Building C alone. No police, no weapons, no phones. You have 30 minutes. Owen stared at the message, knowing it was probably a trap, but also knowing he had no choice. Somewhere in that facility, the woman he'd grown to love was depending on him to save her life, just like he'd saved her from the burning car 6 weeks ago, except this time the stakes were infinitely higher. He turned off his phone, checked his watch, and started walking toward the fence. Building C was visible in the distance, a concrete structure with no windows and only one visible entrance. Whatever was waiting for him there, Owen Stone was about to discover that being a hero was more complicated than running toward a burning car. Sometimes, it meant walking deliberately into the darkness, knowing you might not come back out. Owen approached Building C with the methodical caution his construction experience had taught him. Assess the structure, identify potential hazards, plan multiple exit routes. The industrial facility felt wrong in ways that went beyond its obvious abandonment. Security cameras tracked his movement despite the empty parking lots, and the maintenance of the ground suggested recent activity, even though the buildings appeared vacant. The entrance to Building C stood slightly ajar, an obvious invitation. That made Owen's skin crawl. But with Sarah's life hanging in the balance, he had no choice but to accept the trap and hope. His carpenter's knowledge of building layouts would give him some advantage once inside. The interior was sterile and clinical, polished concrete floors, fluorescent lighting, and the kind of advanced ventilation system that suggested this had been more than a simple research facility. Owen recognized the signs of a high security environment, the type of place where valuable secrets would be developed and protected. "Mr. Stone," a voice echoed from hidden speakers. "Thank you for coming. Please proceed down the hallway to Conference Room A." Owen followed the directions, his work boots echoing in the empty corridor. The walls displayed generic corporate art and motivational posters about innovation and teamwork. But something about the setup felt theatrical, as if the entire facility was an elaborate stage designed to create specific impressions. Conference Room A contained a long table surrounded by leather chairs, a wall of monitors, and a single man in expensive suit, who rose to greet Owen with the practiced smile of someone accustomed to controlling conversations. "I'm Derek Wilson," the man said, extending his hand. "I was Natalia Hayes, head of security. We need to talk." Owen ignored the offered handshake. "Where is she?" "Safe for now," Wilson replied, gesturing for Owen to sit. "But her safety depends entirely on your cooperation and understanding of the situation." The monitors flickered to life, displaying financial charts, corporate organizational diagrams, and what appeared to be surveillance footage from various locations. Owen recognized several images of himself walking Emma to school, working at construction sites, visiting the hospital. They'd been watching him far longer than he'd realized. 6 months ago, Natalia Hayes was the most powerful woman in the technology industry, Wilson began, clicking through slides that showed corporate headquarters, board meetings, and magazine covers featuring an elegant woman in business attire. She controlled billions in assets and held the key to artificial intelligence systems that would revolutionize global commerce. Owen studied the images, trying to reconcile the polished CEO with the confused, vulnerable woman who'd helped Emma with homework in his kitchen. "So you decided to kill her?" "We decided to save her," Wilson corrected. "Natalia was spiraling, Mr. Stone. Paranoid, isolated, making increasingly erratic decisions that threatened not only her company, but the thousands of jobs that depended on her leadership. The board of directors asked me to intervene." More images flashed on the screen: medical reports, psychological evaluations, security footage showing a woman who appeared increasingly agitated and fearful. Owen recognized Sarah's mannerisms even in these glimpses of her previous life, but the context was completely different from what he'd expected. She'd become convinced that someone was trying to kill her, Wilson continued. Seeing conspiracies everywhere, trusting no one, sleeping in different locations every night. The stress was destroying her judgment and her health. Maybe because someone actually was trying to kill her, Owen pointed out. Wilson's expression remained patient, as if explaining something obvious to a slow student. The accident was meant to be therapeutic, not fatal. A controlled scenario that would allow us to place Natalia in a secure medical facility where she could receive treatment for her paranoia and anxiety disorders. Owen felt sick. You caused her amnesia deliberately. We created an opportunity for her to start fresh, free from the delusions and fears that were consuming her life, Wilson said. The amnesia was an unexpected but beneficial side effect. For the first time in years, Natalia was happy, relaxed, able to form normal relationships. The monitors now showed surveillance footage from Owen's own home, Sarah reading to Emma, cooking dinner, laughing at something on television. The invasion of privacy was staggering, but Owen forced himself to focus on the larger implications of Wilson's words. You've been watching us the entire time. We had to ensure her safety and monitor her recovery, Wilson confirmed. When she chose to stay with you rather than accept placement in a state facility, we saw it as a positive development. You provided exactly the kind of stable, nurturing environment that traditional therapy couldn't offer. Owen's mind raced, trying to separate truth from manipulation in Wilson's carefully crafted narrative. If everything was going so well, why did you take her? Because she was starting to remember, Wilson said, his composure cracking slightly. Fragments at first: business terminology, financial concepts, technology protocols. But yesterday, she accessed a computer at the women's shelter and attempted to log into Hayes Technologies' corporate network. The implications hit Owen like a physical blow. Sarah's mysterious knowledge about business, her instinctive competence with complex problems, her natural authority, it all made sense if she'd been running a billion-dollar company before the accident. The Phoenix Protocol, Owen said. That's what this is really about. Wilson's calm facade dropped entirely. Phoenix is worth hundreds of billions of dollars, Mr. Stone. Artificial intelligence that can predict market movements, optimize supply chains, and revolutionize global commerce. Natalia was the only person who understood how to implement it safely. So you needed her alive but controllable. We needed her healthy and rational, Wilson insisted. The paranoid, increasingly unstable woman she'd become was a danger to herself and everyone around her. The therapeutic amnesia gave us a chance to help her rebuild her identity in a healthier framework. Owen stood up, his carpenter's instincts telling him this conversation was a distraction from whatever was really happening in the facility. I want to see her, now. Wilson hesitated, then pressed a button on the conference table. The monitors switched to a live feed from what appeared to be a comfortable apartment bedroom, sitting area, kitchenette. Sarah was there, sitting at a small table and writing in a notebook. She looked calm but alert, occasionally glancing toward the camera as if aware she was being observed. She's not being harmed, Wilson said. But she's also not being allowed to leave until we can ensure that her recovered memories won't pose a threat to corporate security or her own mental health. Owen studied Sarah's image on the screen, looking for signs of distress or coercion. She appeared to be taking notes, possibly trying to piece together fragments of returning memory. Her movements seemed natural and unforced, but Owen noticed. She was positioned where she could watch the room's only door. How long are you planning to keep her prisoner? Until we can implement a controlled reintegration process, Wilson replied. Gradually restore her memories in a therapeutic environment, help her understand the context of her previous paranoia, and prepare her to resume her responsibilities with appropriate medical support. It sounded reasonable, even compassionate. But Owen's instincts screamed that something was fundamentally wrong with Wilson's version of events. The elaborate facility, the extensive surveillance, the carefully orchestrated accident, it all suggested a level of planning and resources that went far beyond corporate concern for an unstable executive. "What about Emma?" Owen asked. "My daughter. She's attached to Sarah. She's going to be devastated if Sarah just disappears from her life." Wilson's expression softened slightly. "We understand that would be difficult. Perhaps we could arrange supervised visits once Natalia's treatment is complete. You've clearly been a positive influence on her recovery." Owen nodded as if considering the offer, but internally he was cataloging everything he'd observed about the facility's layout and security. His construction experience had taught him to read building plans, understand structural systems, and identify weak points in seemingly solid structures. "Can I talk to her?" Owen asked. "Just for a few minutes?" Wilson hesitated, then nodded. "Brief conversation only. Don't say anything that might trigger traumatic memories or increase her agitation." As Wilson led him through corridors toward Sarah's location, Owen noticed details that suggested this facility was more prison than hospital. Reinforced doors, limited windows, and security checkpoints that could be activated remotely. Whatever Natalia Hayes had been before her accident, the people holding her now were taking extraordinary precautions to prevent her escape. When they reached the apartment where Sarah was being held, Owen saw her face light up with relief and joy that couldn't possibly be faked. Whatever else might be true about her identity or her past, her feelings for him and Emma were genuine. "Owen!" Sarah rushed to the reinforced glass that separated them. "Are you okay? Is Emma safe?" "We're fine," Owen assured her, pressing his hand against the glass. "Sarah, do you remember anything new about who you really are?" Sarah glanced nervously at Wilson, who was monitoring their conversation from just outside the room. "Some things," she said carefully. "Important things. But Owen, you need to be careful. The people who brought me here aren't who they claim to be." Wilson stepped forward. "That's enough, Mr. Stone. I think you can see that Natalia is safe and well cared for. Now we need to discuss the terms of your continued discretion regarding this matter." But Owen was studying Sarah's face, reading the intelligence and determination that amnesia had never been able to touch. She was trying to tell him something without alerting her captors, using the same careful communication skills that had probably made her successful in corporate boardrooms. "I understand," Owen said, meeting Sarah's eyes. "I'll be very discreet about everything I've learned here." Sarah smiled, and Owen caught the subtle message in her expression. She had a plan, and she needed him to trust her judgment about when and how to implement it. As Wilson escorted Owen back through the facility, Owen memorized every detail of the building's layout, security systems, and potential vulnerabilities. He might be leaving Sarah behind for now, but he wasn't abandoning her. The woman he'd fallen in love with was apparently a billionaire CEO with enemies powerful enough to stage elaborate kidnappings. But she was also the person who'd read bedtime stories to Emma and patiently helped with homework and brought laughter back into their house. Whatever the truth about Natalia Hayes' past, Owen Stone was going to make sure she had a future to remember. Owen drove straight from the research facility to Crawford's law office, his mind reeling from everything Wilson had revealed. The distinguished attorney was waiting with FBI agent Lisa Chun, a sharp-eyed woman who listened intently as Owen recounted his conversation with Derek Wilson and the conditions of Sarah's captivity. Wilson's story has elements of truth mixed with dangerous fiction, Crawford said grimly. Natalia was indeed receiving threats, but she wasn't paranoid or unstable. She was methodically investigating a conspiracy within her own company. Agent Chun pulled out a thick file. "We've been building a case against Wilson and his associates for months. Corporate espionage, securities fraud, and now kidnapping. But we needed proof of their current activities to move forward. What kind of conspiracy? Owen asked. Crawford exchanged glances with Agent Chun before continuing. 3 months before her disappearance, Natalia discovered that someone had been systematically stealing Hayes Technologies' intellectual property and selling it to foreign competitors. The Phoenix Protocol was just the crown jewel they'd been bleeding the company dry for years. The lawyer pulled out corporate documents and financial records that painted a picture of elaborate theft and deception. Wilson wasn't head of security, he was the inside man facilitating the thefts. When Natalia got too close to exposing the operation, they decided to eliminate her permanently. Owen felt sick as the full scope of the deception became clear. So the therapeutic amnesia story, ... Complete fabrication, Agent Chun confirmed. They staged the accident hoping to kill her, but when she survived with memory loss, they saw an opportunity to control her indefinitely while they completed the theft of Phoenix Protocol. But she's starting to remember, Owen said. That's why they moved her to the facility. Exactly. And once they extract everything they need about Phoenix, she becomes a liability they can't afford to keep alive. Owen's hands clenched into fists. How do we get her out? Agent Chun's expression was grim. The facility's essentially a fortress. Private security, isolated location, legal corporate ownership that makes obtaining search warrants complicated. We're working on it, but it takes time, Owen finished. Time Sarah doesn't have. Crawford leaned forward. There might be another way. Natalia gave me emergency protocols 6 months ago, contingency plans in case something happened. To her, she was more prepared than Wilson realizes. The lawyer unlocked a safe and withdrew a small electronic device. This contains complete backups of Phoenix Protocol and evidence of the corporate espionage. Natalia hid copies of everything in multiple secure locations. Why haven't you used this before now? Owen asked. Because it was designed to be activated only by Natalia herself, using biometric authentication that requires her physical presence, Crawford explained. But if she's recovering her memory, ... Agent Chun's phone buzzed with an urgent message. We've got a problem. NSA intercepted communications suggesting Wilson's people are planning to move Sarah within the next few hours. Once they take her out of the country, we lose jurisdiction. Owen stood up abruptly. Then we're out of time for legal approaches. Mr. Stone, I understand your feelings, but this requires professional law enforcement response, Agent Chun insisted. We can't authorize civilian involvement in what's essentially a hostage rescue operation. But Crawford was studying Owen with calculating eyes. Actually, Agent Chun, Mr. Stone might be our best option for reaching Natalia before it's too late. What do you mean? Crawford turned to Owen. The facility where they're holding her, you said you examined the layout during your visit? Owen nodded. Construction from the 1980s. Probably retrofitted for high security. But I noticed several potential vulnerabilities, such as... Owen pulled out a napkin and began sketching the building layout from memory. The ventilation system is oversized for a facility that's small, probably designed for manufacturing rather than office space. Service tunnels, maintenance access, emergency exits that might not be as heavily monitored. Agent Chun studied Owen's rough blueprints. You're talking about breaking into a secured facility to extract a kidnapping victim. That's incredibly dangerous and potentially illegal. It's also the only way to save Sarah's life, Owen said firmly. Wilson's people made one crucial mistake. They think I'm just some working-class hero who stumbled into their operation. They're not expecting me to come back. Crawford was already reaching for his phone. I can provide building schematics from the city planning office. Officially, of course, just for legal review purposes. Over the next 2 hours, Owen found himself at the center of an impromptu rescue planning session that felt surreal given his background as a small-town carpenter. But his construction experience proved invaluable as he identified entry points. mapped security blind spots, and calculated the best approach routes. The loading dock on the east side, Owen explained, pointing to the architectural drawings Crawford had obtained. It's designed for truck access, which means heavy doors, but minimal electronic security. And look here, the maintenance tunnel. System connects to the building's central HVAC. Agent Chun was clearly uncomfortable with the planned civilian elements. Even if you could reach the building where Ms. Hayes is being held, how would you extract her? Wilson's people will be armed and professionally trained. Owen's phone rang before he could answer, an unknown number that made his blood run cold. Mr. Stone, Derek Wilson's voice was cold and professional. I'm afraid there's been a change in plans. We'll be transferring Natalia to a more secure facility this evening. I thought you should know that your cooperation is still essential for her continued well-being. What kind of cooperation? Owen asked, gesturing for Agent Chun to trace the call. The kind that ensures your daughter Emma continues to walk safely to school every morning, Wilson said quietly. I trust you understand the implications. The line went dead, and Owen felt fury unlike anything he'd experienced since Sarah's death. They were threatening Emma now, using his 8-year-old daughter as leverage to control him. They just crossed a line they can't uncross, Owen said grimly. Agent Chun was already coordinating with local police to provide protection for Emma, but Owen knew that wouldn't be enough. As long as Wilson and his associates remained free, his family would never be safe. Crawford handed Owen an envelope. Everything you need is in here: facility access codes that Natalia provided 6 months ago, emergency contact numbers, and authorization documentation that should help if you encounter law enforcement. This is insane, Agent Chun protested. We should wait for backup, coordinate with tactical teams, follow proper protocols. Sarah doesn't have time for proper protocols, Owen replied, checking his watch. And neither does Emma. As Owen prepared to leave for what might be the most dangerous night of his life, Crawford pulled him aside. There's something else you should know about Natalia, the lawyer said quietly. The reason she never married, never had family of her own. What about it? She was terrified of putting people she loved at risk. The corporate world she operated in was ruthless, and she'd seen too many executives' families become targets. She chose isolation to protect others. Owen understood the implication. Sarah's careful distance from romantic relationships hadn't been about not wanting love. It had been about not wanting to endanger the people she might come to love. But she let herself care about you and Emma, Crawford continued. Do you understand? How significant that is? How much trust that represents? Owen nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility and love in equal measure. Sarah had taken the biggest risk of her life by opening her heart to his family, and now it was his turn to risk everything to save hers. As he drove through the darkening streets toward the industrial facility, Owen thought about the woman who had seamlessly transitioned from billion-dollar boardrooms to bedtime stories, from corporate leadership to homework help. The amnesia had stripped away her defenses and revealed the person she'd always been underneath the executive armor, someone capable of profound love and fierce protection of those she cared about. Tonight, Owen Stone was going to prove he was worthy of that love, no matter what it cost him. The maintenance tunnel beneath the research facility was cramped, dark, and filled with the industrial humming of ventilation systems that Owen navigated by feel and instinct. His construction experience had taught him to read building systems like blueprints, and the overhead ductwork guided him toward the central section where Sarah was being held. Crawford's access codes had worked perfectly at the service entrance, confirming that Natalia Hayes had indeed prepared for this exact scenario months before her disappearance. The woman who couldn't remember her own name had left breadcrumbs. That would lead to her rescue if Owen could reach her before Wilson's people moved her to whatever more secure facility they had planned. Through gaps in the ceiling panels, Owen could hear voices and movement in the rooms above. Wilson was coordinating the transfer operation, his tone urgent and professional as he directed his team to prepare for immediate departure. "The helicopter will be here in 30 minutes, Wilson was saying. "All documentation needs to be secured, and the subject needs to be sedated for transport. We can't risk any complications during the move." Owen's jaw tightened. They were planning to drug Sarah, which meant his window of opportunity was closing rapidly. He located the ventilation grate that led to her apartment and began working on the screws with tools from his carpenter's belt. The grate came away quietly, and Owen dropped into Sarah's room just as she looked up from her notebook with startled recognition. "Owen," she whispered, rushing to embrace him. "I knew you'd come. But it's dangerous. They have armed guards throughout the building. Are you hurt?" Owen asked, checking her for signs of injury or distress. "I'm fine, but Owen, I remember everything. Now my name, my company, the people who tried to kill me." Sarah's eyes were bright with intelligence and determination that reminded Owen of the executive she'd been. "Derek Wilson has been stealing from Hayes Technology for years. He needs Phoenix Protocol to complete the theft, but he also needs me, dead to cover his tracks." Owen pulled out the electronic device Crawford had given him. "Your lawyer gave me this. He said it contains evidence of the corporate espionage." Sarah's face lit up with recognition. "Emergency Protocol 7. I recorded everything: financial records, communication intercepts, documentation of the theft. But it needs my biometric signature to activate." She pressed her thumb to the device's scanner, and immediately it began transmitting data to predetermined recipients: the FBI, the Securities and Exchange Commission, Hayes Technology's Board of Directors, and major news organizations. "Wilson's operation is finished," Sarah said with satisfaction. "But we still need to get out of here before he realizes what's happening." Owen led her back toward the ventilation system, but before they could reach the opening, the apartment door burst open and Derek Wilson entered with 2 armed security guards. "I'm disappointed, Mr. Stone," Wilson said, his professional demeanor replaced by cold menace. "We gave you every opportunity to cooperate, but you chose to make this personal." "You threatened my daughter," Owen replied, positioning himself between Wilson and Sarah. That made it personal. Wilson gestured to his guards, who raised their weapons. "Natalia, you've just destroyed years of careful planning and cost several people their lives. I hope you're satisfied with your heroic principles." "I'm satisfied that a thief and attempted murderer is about to face justice," Sarah replied with the executive authority that amnesia had never been able to touch. "Justice?" Wilson laughed bitterly. "You think the corporate world operates on justice? I was protecting Hayes Technology from your increasingly erratic leadership. The board would have voted you out within 6 months anyway. The board would have voted you into prison if they'd known what you were stealing," Sarah countered. Wilson's expression turned deadly. "Well, they'll never get that chance now." But before Wilson could give orders to his guards, the facilities emergency lighting activated and alarms began blaring throughout the building. Agent Chun's voice echoed from the public address system. "This is the FBI. The building is surrounded. Drop your weapons and surrender immediately." Wilson's face went pale as he realized his operation was collapsing around him. Through the apartment's small window, Owen could see FBI tactical vehicles surrounding the facility and agents moving into position. "How?" Wilson demanded, looking between Owen and Sarah. Sarah smiled with the confidence of someone who'd spent years outmaneuvering corporate adversaries. "Emergency Protocol 7 doesn't just transmit evidence, it also includes GPS coordinates and a request for immediate law enforcement response. I activated it 6 months ago when I first suspected you were planning to kill me." The guards looked uncertain as FBI commands continued echoing through the building. Wilson's authority was evaporating as quickly as his escape options. "Drop your weapons and step away from the civilians," Agent Chun commanded as she entered. The apartment with a full tactical team behind her. The surrender was anticlimactic after the months of conspiracy and violence. Wilson and his associates were taken into custody without resistance, their elaborate operation undone by the very technology they'd been trying to steal. As Owen and Sarah were escorted to safety by FBI agents, Sarah suddenly stopped and turned to face the facility where she'd been held captive. "I remember everything now," she said quietly. "Not just my name and my company, but who I was before the accident. The isolation, the fear, the way I pushed people away to protect them." Owen took her hand. "And now? Now I remember why I let myself care about you and Emma despite the risks," Sarah replied. "Because some things are worth fighting for, even when it's dangerous." 6 weeks later, Owen stood in the kitchen of their new house. Not the mansion that Natalia Hayes could have afforded, but a comfortable home in a neighborhood where Emma could ride her bike to school and Owen could still work with his hands. Sarah had insisted on something that felt like a real family home rather than a symbol of wealth and success. "Daddy, can we have pancakes for breakfast?" Emma called from the living room, where she was showing Sarah her latest art project. Family portrait featuring 3 people holding hands in front of a house that looked suspiciously like their new home. "It's Tuesday," Owen reminded her, but he was already reaching for the pancake mix. Some traditions were worth breaking for special occasions, and every day since Sarah's memory returned felt like a celebration. Sarah entered the kitchen, carrying Emma's artwork, her face radiant with the kind of happiness that had nothing to do with stock options or quarterly earnings. "She wants to know if we can put this on the refrigerator next to all her other pictures." Owen looked at the drawing, Emma's vision of their family complete, and together, and felt the same sense of rightness he'd experienced that first night when Sarah had helped with homework while dinner cooked on the stove. "I think that's exactly where it belongs," Owen said. Hayes Technology Solutions had welcomed back their CEO with celebration and relief, but Natalia Hayes had negotiated a new arrangement that allowed for actual work-life balance. The company would continue to thrive under her leadership, but her definition of success now included time for school plays and family dinners and lazy Saturday mornings. "No regrets?" Owen asked as they watched Emma arrange her artwork on the refrigerator with scientific precision. "About which part?" Sarah replied. "Losing my memory, finding my family, or discovering that the most important things in life can't be bought or negotiated." "Any of it." Sarah smiled and kissed him softly. "The only thing I regret is that it took a car accident and amnesia for me to realize that love is worth any risk." Outside, Willowbrook Heights was waking up to another ordinary day: neighbors walking dogs, children heading to school, the comfortable rhythm of a community where people looked out for each other. But inside the house on Maple Street, 3 people who had found each other against impossible odds were building something extraordinary from the simple materials of daily love and shared dreams. Owen Stone had saved a woman from a burning car and discovered she was a missing CEO, but more importantly, he'd learned that sometimes the most valuable things in life come disguised as ordinary moments: bedtime stories and homework help and pancakes on Tuesday morning, shared with people who choose to love each other despite the risks. And as Emma hung the latest family portrait in the place of honor on their refrigerator, all 3 of them understood that they were living the most important story of their lives, not a tale of corporate intrigue or dramatic rescues, but the simple, profound story of a family that chose each other and decided to build a future together, one ordinary, extraordinary day at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.